I am Morgan Riley, 31 years old, and I never thought my own father would slap me across the face at my brother Carlos's wedding. All because I refused to give up my penthouse apartment that I had worked so hard for. The slap stung, but not nearly as much as the betrayal. The room of 200 guests fell silent as I touched my burning cheek and whispered words that changed everything. "You just lost me." If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are from. Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself when family crosses the line. Growing up in Boston, our family lived a comfortable middle-class life. Nothing extravagant, but we never went without. My father William worked as a bank manager while my mother Patricia taught elementary school. My younger brother Carlos was always the golden child from the moment he arrived when I was 5 years old. The family dynamics were clear even to me as a child. Carlos could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. While I was expected to be responsible, get straight A's, and help around the house, Carlos sailed through life with half the effort and twice the praise. When he got a C in math, my parents would say, "At least he passed." When I got an A-, they would ask why it was not an A+. That pattern continued throughout our childhood and into our teen years. Despite this imbalance, I loved my brother. Carlos had a carefree charm that made him popular and likable. He would flash his winning smile and talk his way out of trouble while I worked diligently in the background. I did not resent him for it. I simply recognized that we were different people with different paths. After high school, I worked 2 jobs to put myself through college, earning a business degree with honors. No one came to my graduation ceremony because Carlos had a baseball tournament that weekend. I told myself it did not matter. I was used to celebrating my achievements alone. While Carlos drifted between community college programs, never quite finding his passion, I launched my career with fierce determination. Starting as an entry-level marketing associate at a tech company, I worked 80-hour weeks, took night classes to learn coding, and eventually developed a software solution that revolutionized how the company managed client relationships. By 27, I had started my own tech consultancy firm. The business grew rapidly as my reputation for solving complex problems spread. Within 3 years, I had a team of 25 employees and contracts with major corporations. The financial success surprised even me. I went from scraping by to substantial wealth in what felt like the blink of an eye. When I turned 30, I finally allowed myself to fulfill a personal dream. After years of saving and investing wisely, I purchased a stunning penthouse apartment in downtown Boston with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. The 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom space with a private rooftop terrace represented everything I had worked for. Every morning, I would sip coffee while watching the sunrise over the water, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment and peace. As my success grew, so did my parents' expectations. What started as occasional requests for loans became regular expectations. They called when Carlos needed a new car after wrecking his 3rd one. They called when he wanted to take a girlfriend on an expensive vacation. They called when he needed first and last month's rent for an apartment he would move out of 3 months later. I rarely said no. Part of me still craved their approval, and part of me genuinely wanted to help my brother. But I noticed that the appreciation for these gifts diminished with each check I wrote. What started as profuse gratitude became casual expectations. My mother would often say, "Well, it is not like you need the money anyway." When Carlos announced his engagement to Rebecca, a woman from a wealthy family he had been dating for just 8 months, my parents were ecstatic. I was invited to the engagement party where I met Rebecca for the first time. She was beautiful, polished, and clearly used to luxury. Her parents owned several car dealerships across New England and had apparently promised the couple a lavish wedding. What my parents did not tell me until later was that they had also promised to contribute significantly to the wedding costs, money they did not actually have. My mother called me in tears, explaining how they could not back out now without embarrassing themselves in front of Rebecca's family. Without hesitation, I transferred enough money to cover their portion, asking only that they keep my contribution private. I wanted Carlos to have his perfect day without the complication of feeling indebted to his sister. As the wedding day approached, I felt a mix of emotions. I was happy for Carlos finding someone who seemed to make him happy, but I also felt the familiar pang of being an outsider in my own family. The wedding preparations consumed all family conversations, and once again, my accomplishments faded into the background. When I closed a major contract with an international client, my mother listened for 30 seconds before interrupting to ask if I had mailed back my RSVP card. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather. I put on the emerald green bridesmaid dress that Rebecca had selected, styled my dark hair in elegant waves, and applied makeup that highlighted my hazel eyes. Looking in the mirror, I reminded myself that today was about Carlos, not about our complicated family dynamics. I would smile, dance, and celebrate my brother, even if part of me still felt like the forgotten daughter. I drove to the luxurious oceanfront resort where the ceremony would take place, pulling my BMW into the valet line behind a row of luxury vehicles. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out into the sunshine, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the grand entrance, unaware that this would be the day everything in my family would finally come to a breaking point. The Burton Resort was even more spectacular than I had imagined when I helped pay for it. Situated on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, the historic mansion had been converted into a premier wedding venue with manicured gardens and a glass-walled reception hall. Arrangements of white roses and silver accents adorned every surface, and a string quartet played softly in the corner of the garden where the ceremony would take place. All of this luxury came with a price tag that would have bought a small house in some neighborhoods. As I walked through the garden toward the gathering guests, I noticed several relatives doing double takes when they saw me. Aunt Judith rushed over, her eyebrows raised in surprise. "Morgan, is that you? We were not sure you would make it. You are always so busy with your little business," she said, her tone suggesting my career was some sort of hobby rather than a multimillion-dollar company. "I would not miss my only brother's wedding, Aunt Judith," I replied with a practiced smile. "How have you been?" "Oh, fine. Your cousin Melissa just had her third baby, you know. Such a blessing to see her fulfilling her purpose as a mother." She glanced meaningfully at my bare ring finger. "And what about you, dear? Any special someone yet?" Before I could answer, my Judith, the photographer, wants family photos in 10 minutes by the rose garden. "Morgan, you look nice, but could you touch up your lipstick?" "It is a bit faded," she said, barely looking at me before hurrying away to direct another group of guests. I slipped into the bathroom to check my appearance. My lipstick was perfectly fine. This was just another example of how nothing I did was ever quite good enough. As I walked back out, I nearly collided with Carlos, looking handsome in his tailored tuxedo. "Hey sis," he said, giving me a brief, awkward hug. "Thanks for coming." "Of course I came. Congratulations, Carlos." "Rebecca seems wonderful," I said sincerely. "Yeah, she is amazing," he replied, shifting uncomfortably. "Did you bring the wedding gift?" I reached into my clutch and pulled out an envelope containing a check for $5,000 along with a heartfelt card. "Right here. I hope you both love it." Carlos took the envelope, peeked inside, and his eyes widened slightly at the amount. He quickly regained his composure and slipped it into his pocket without reading the card. "Thanks. That will help with the honeymoon. Listen, I gotta go check on some things before the ceremony. See you later, okay?" He hurried off without waiting for my response, leaving me standing alone once again. The interaction felt transactional rather than brotherly, but I pushed the feeling aside. Today was not the day to dwell on old wounds. As guests continued to arrive, I spotted my cousin Samantha, the only family member I truly connected with. She was 4 years younger than me and had recently graduated from medical school. Unlike the rest of the family, she seemed to genuinely admire my independence and career success. "Morgan," she exclaimed, wrapping me in a genuine hug. "You look absolutely gorgeous. How is the tech world treating you?" "Business is good," I smiled, appreciating her interest. "How about you? How is residency going?" "Exhausting but worth it," she replied. "Listen, I wanted to warn you about something. I overheard Aunt Patricia and Uncle William talking earlier about you, and it seemed intense. Something about your place downtown?" I could not hear everything, but they mentioned Carlos and Rebecca needing somewhere to live after the honeymoon. A knot formed in my stomach. That is strange. No one has mentioned anything to me. Samantha squeezed my arm. "Just giving you a heads up. You know how this family can be sometimes." Before we could discuss it further, the wedding coordinator announced that everyone should take their seats for the ceremony. I found my place in the third row on the groom's side, next to distant relatives who barely acknowledged me. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Rebecca floated down the aisle in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. Carlos looked genuinely happy as they exchanged vows against the backdrop of the sparkling ocean. For a moment, I felt a pang of something like loneliness. While I loved my independence, there was something touching about two people promising to build a life together. As the newlyweds walked back up the aisle to thunderous applause, I caught my parents watching me from their front row seats. My father whispered something to my mother, and they both looked my way with expressions I could not quite read. Then my father nodded toward Carlos, who glanced back at me with an odd, almost guilty look. Something was definitely off, and Samantha's warning echoed in my mind as guests began moving toward the reception hall. Whatever was going on, I had a feeling I was about to find out, and I suspected I was not going to like it. The reception was in full swing by the time I made my way into the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over elegantly set tables, and the band played a jazzy rendition of a popular love song as couples filled the dance floor. I took a glass of champagne from a passing server and found my assigned seat at a table with distant cousins and friends of my parents who barely knew me. After dinner and the traditional first dances, I decided to mingle rather than sit alone at my table. As I walked toward the bar, a tall man with kind eyes and a warm smile approached me. "You must be the sister of the groom," he said, extending his hand. "I am Ethan Parker, friend of Carlos from college." "Morgan Riley," I replied, shaking his hand. Though I am surprised Carlos mentioned having a sister. He tends to forget that detail in everyday life. Ethan laughed, a genuine sound that made me smile despite myself. "He mentioned you run some kind of successful tech company. Said his big sister was the smart one in the family." I was surprised Carlos had spoken about me at all, let alone in complimentary terms. "We have our different strengths," I said diplomatically. "I would love to hear about your company," Ethan said, leaning against the bar. "I work in venture capital, so I am always interested in tech innovations." For the next 20 minutes, Ethan and I engaged in the most stimulating conversation I had experienced all day. He asked intelligent questions about my business model and shared insights about market trends. It was refreshing to talk to someone who saw me as more than just Carlos's spinster sister. "Would you like to dance?" Ethan asked as the band shifted to a slower song. Before I could answer, I felt a hand on my shoulder. My mother stood there, her smile tight and not reaching her eyes. "Morgan, dear, your father and I need to speak with you for a moment." "It is important," she said, glancing dismissively at Ethan. "I am in the middle of a conversation, Mom," I replied, feeling childishly defiant. "It will only take a minute," she insisted, her grip on my shoulder tightening. "Family matters." I apologized to Ethan, who graciously understood, and followed my mother to a quieter corner of the venue where my father was waiting, looking uncharacteristically nervous. As we approached, I saw Carlos walking toward us as well, looking uncomfortable but determined. "What is going on?" I asked, instantly on guard. "Is everything okay?" My mother's demeanor shifted immediately, her voice becoming syrupy sweet. "Morgan, sweetheart, you look beautiful tonight. That color really brings out your eyes." I recognized this tactic. My mother only complimented me when she wanted something. "Thank you. What did you want to talk about?" "Well," she began, placing her hand on my arm, "we have been thinking about Carlos and Rebecca's future. They are just starting their lives together, and we want to make sure they have the best possible beginning." My father nodded solemnly. "A solid foundation is important for a young marriage." Carlos joined us, standing slightly behind my parents as if using them as shields. Rebecca was nowhere to be seen, probably mingling with her family and friends. "As you know," my mother continued, "real estate in the city is so expensive for young couples just starting out. And with Rebecca coming from such a nice background, they want to maintain a certain standard of living." My stomach began to sink as I realized where this conversation was heading. Still, I let my mother continue her carefully rehearsed speech. "We were talking about how perfect your penthouse would be for them. 3 bedrooms for when they start a family, that gorgeous view, and the location is ideal for Carlos's new job downtown." I blinked, certain I had misheard. "My penthouse? What about my penthouse?" My father stepped forward. "What your mother is trying to say is that we think it would be a wonderful wedding gift if you would let Carlos and Rebecca move into your penthouse." "Move in? You mean rent it from me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Well, no," my mother said with an uncomfortable laugh. "We mean give it to them. As a gift. You could easily find another place. With your money, you could buy any apartment in the city." I stared at them in disbelief. "You want me to give away my home? The home I worked years to afford? The place I love living in?" Carlos finally spoke up. "It would really help us out, sis. Rebecca has always dreamed of living in that part of the city, and when Mom and Dad mentioned you had a place there." So they had been discussing this plan with Carlos, but not with me, the actual owner of the property in question. "This is the first I am hearing about this," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "Why did no one think to discuss this with me before the wedding day?" "We did not want to bother you," my mother said dismissively. "You are always so busy with work." Too busy for a conversation about giving away my home. My voice rose slightly and a few nearby guests glanced our way. My father frowned. "Lower your voice, Morgan. This is your brother's wedding day." "Exactly," I replied. "Which makes this an incredibly inappropriate time to ambush me with such a request." My mother's sweet facade began to crack. "It is not an ambush. It is a perfectly reasonable family request. Family helps family. Carlos needs that apartment more than you do. You are just one person in that big space, while they will be starting a family." "You do not know that I will always be just one person," I countered. "And even if I were, that does not make my home up for grabs." Carlos shifted uncomfortably. "Rebecca already told her parents about the penthouse. They are expecting us to move in after the honeymoon." I stared at him incredulously. "You told her parents you were getting my home before even asking me." "We assumed you would want to help your brother," my father said, his voice hardening. "You have always been selfish, Morgan, but we thought you would do this one thing for Carlos." More guests were beginning to notice our heated conversation, and a small crowd had gathered at a polite distance, pretending not to eavesdrop, but clearly interested in the family drama unfolding. "I have been selfish," I repeated, unable to believe what I was hearing. "I paid for half of this wedding without being asked. I have given Carlos money for cars, rent, vacations. I have supported this family financially for years without complaint." "That is different," my mother said. "That was just money. This is your brother's future." "And what about my future?" I asked. "That penthouse is my home." My father's face was growing redder by the second. "You need to stop thinking only about yourself for once. Carlos is married now. He has responsibilities. You are still single with no one to worry about but yourself." The crowd around us had grown, and I could see Rebecca making her way toward us, her expression curious and concerned. "I am not giving away my home," I said firmly. "I am happy to help Carlos and Rebecca in other ways, but that penthouse is not on the table." My mother's eyes filled with tears, another manipulation tactic I recognized from childhood. How can you be so cruel on your brother's special day? All we are asking is that you show some family loyalty. The situation was escalating, and I knew I needed to end this conversation before it completely ruined the reception. We can discuss this another time, in private, I said, turning to leave. My father grabbed my arm, stopping me. No, we are settling this now. Carlos told Rebecca's parents they would have that penthouse. Do you want to make him look like a liar on his wedding day? The room seemed to shrink around us as more and more guests noticed the confrontation. Even the band had quieted, sensing the tension in the air. Carlos made a promise he had no right to make, I said, pulling my arm free. That is not my responsibility to fix. The reception had come to a standstill. The band had stopped playing, and a circle had formed around our family, with guests pretending to sip their drinks while watching the drama unfold. Rebecca had reached Carlos and was whispering urgently in his ear, her eyes darting between me and my parents. My father took a step closer to me, his face now fully flushed with anger. I could smell the whiskey on his breath as he spoke, his voice low and threatening. You listen to me, young lady. Your brother has always been there for this family while you ran off to build your fancy career and fancy life. The least you can do is help him now. Been there for the family? How exactly? I asked, genuinely confused. I am the one who has financially supported everyone for years. Money is not everything, Morgan, my mother interjected, dabbing at her eyes with a cocktail napkin. Carlos has given us his time, his presence. He calls us every week, visits on holidays. When was the last time you came home for Sunday dinner? I felt a pang of guilt despite myself. It was true that I had distanced myself from regular family gatherings, but not without reason. Maybe I would come around more if I did not feel judged and used every time I did. My father scoffed. Used? Is that how you see your family? As people who use you. What would you call asking me to give away my home? I countered. Carlos finally spoke up, stepping forward from behind our parents. Morgan, be reasonable. You make more money in a month than I make in a year. You could buy another penthouse tomorrow if you wanted to. That is not the point, Carlos. That penthouse is my home. I love living there. I worked hard for it. Would you give away your home if I asked? He looked uncomfortable. That is different. How is it different? I pressed. Rebecca joined the conversation, her wedding gown rustling as she moved to stand beside Carlos. Morgan, we did not mean to upset you. We just thought, since you are so successful, that you would want to help us start our lives together in style. I noticed she said we, already including herself in this family scheme despite having met me only a handful of times. I also noted that she seemed more concerned about losing the penthouse than about the scene unfolding at her wedding. I am happy to help you both in other ways, I repeated. I could help with a down payment on your own place. But I am not giving up my home. My father's jaw tightened dangerously. After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us? By embarrassing us in front of Rebecca's family? By denying your brother the one thing he has asked of you? The everything we have done for you line struck a nerve. My parents had provided the basics during my childhood, yes, but they had never supported my ambitions or celebrated my achievements. Every accomplishment was met with indifference or criticism. What exactly have you done for me that entitles you to We raised you. My father exploded, loud enough that people at the back of the crowd jumped. We put food on the table, clothes on your back, a roof over your head. We gave you life. You did the legal minimum required of parents, I replied calmly. And I am grateful for that. But it does not entitle you to the fruits of my adult labor. My mother began to sob dramatically, drawing sympathetic looks from some of the older relatives. How can you be so cold? So unfeeling? This is your family. Yes, and family should respect boundaries, I said. Family should not demand that I give up my home as if my needs and feelings do not matter. Your needs, my father sneered. What needs? You are a single woman with no husband, no children. What do you need a 3-bedroom penthouse for? To impress your business associates? To feel important? Each word was designed to wound, to diminish me and my accomplishments. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the pain of never being enough in my parents' eyes despite everything I had achieved. That penthouse is mine, I said firmly. I earned it. I love it. And I am not giving it up. The tension in the air was palpable. Rebecca's parents had joined the circle now, watching with thinly veiled disdain. I could only imagine what Carlos had promised them about his wealthy sister's generous gift. You selfish, ungrateful child, my father hissed, stepping even closer. After everything we have sacrificed for you. I am not a child, I replied. I am a 31-year-old woman who has built a successful life through hard work and determination. And I do not owe you my home. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. My father's face contorted with rage, his control finally snapping. Before I could react, his hand swung through the air and connected with my cheek in a slap that echoed through the silent ballroom. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass. Rebecca covered her mouth in shock. Carlos stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. The sting spread across my face, but I did not cry. I did not scream or cause a scene. Instead, I straightened my spine, looked my father directly in the eyes, and spoke just loudly enough for those nearby to hear. You just lost me. 3 simple words that carried the weight of a lifetime of disappointment and hurt. 3 words that marked the end of something and the beginning of something else entirely. My father seemed to realize what he had done as whispers spread through the crowd. His hand fell to his side, and for a moment he looked older and smaller than I had ever seen him. Morgan, he began, but I was already. With my head held high and my cheek burning, I walked through the parting crowd toward the exit, leaving behind the stunned silence of 200 wedding guests who had just witnessed the unraveling of our family facade. The cool evening air hit my face as I stepped outside the reception hall, providing slight relief to my stinging cheek. The valet looked at me with concern, but said nothing as I handed him my ticket. I maintained my composure, keeping my back straight and my chin up despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. Only when I was safely out of sight of the venue did I allow my hand to touch my cheek, still warm from the impact of my father's palm. I could not remember the last time he had struck me, perhaps when I was 12 and had talked back about a curfew. Even then, it had been a quick, reactionary swat, not a deliberate, public humiliation like this. As I waited for the valet to bring my car, I heard footsteps behind me. Turning slightly, I saw Ethan, the man I had been speaking with earlier, approaching cautiously. Are you okay? He asked, his voice gentle. I saw what happened in there. So did everyone else, I said, attempting a smile that did not quite reach my eyes. Not exactly how I planned to make an exit. Your father had no right to do that, Ethan said, his expression serious. No one has the right to put their hands on you, family or not. Before I could respond, my car arrived. The valet opened the door, studiously avoiding eye contact, clearly having heard about the incident already. I should go, I said to Ethan. He hesitated, then pulled a business card from his pocket. I accepted the card, touched by the small kindness from a virtual stranger when my own family had just betrayed me so completely. Thank you. As I slid into the driver's seat, I noticed my hands were shaking. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, willing myself to hold it together at least until I was away from the venue. But as I pulled onto the main road, the first tear escaped, followed quickly by another and another until I was forced to pull over because I could no longer see through the blur. In the privacy of my car, parked on a quiet side street, I finally allowed myself to break down. Sobs racked my body as years of suppressed hurt, disappointment, and anger poured out. I cried for the little girl who had never been good enough, for the young woman whose achievements were consistently overlooked, and for the adult who had just been publicly humiliated by the people who should have loved her most. My phone began buzzing incessantly in my purse. I pulled it out to find a flood of text messages and missed calls. Some were from Samantha, asking if I was okay and where I had gone. Others were from distant relatives and family friends expressing shock and concern. There was one from Carlos that simply read, "That was messed up. You okay?" Nothing from my parents. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of what had transpired. As my sobs subsided into hiccuping breaths, my phone rang again. It was Samantha. I answered, my voice still thick with tears. "Morgan? Where are you? Are you all right?" Her voice was filled with genuine concern. "I am parked a few blocks away," I admitted. "I could not drive like this." "Stay there." "I am coming to you," she said decisively. "You should not be alone right now." 20 minutes later, Samantha tapped on my window, her face drawn with worry. She was still in her wedding guest dress, but had thrown a jacket over it and changed into flat shoes. I unlocked the door, and she slid into the passenger seat. Without a word, she reached over and enveloped me in a hug. That simple act of compassion nearly set me off crying again, but I managed to maintain control. "Everyone is talking about it," she said when she finally released me. "Uncle William is trying to act like nothing happened, but Aunt Patricia is a mess. Carlos and Rebecca are putting on brave faces, but you can tell they are mortified." "I ruined their wedding," I said, guilt creeping and despite everything. Samantha shook her head emphatically. "No, you did not. Uncle William ruined it when he decided to slap his daughter in front of 200 people because she would not give away her home. That is not on you, Morgan." Hearing someone else frame it that way helped clarify my own thoughts. My entire life, I had accepted blame that was not mine to carry, believing that if I could just be better, do more, my family would finally appreciate me. But in that moment, I realized the painful truth. Nothing would ever be enough for them. "I cannot believe they expected me to give them my penthouse," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "Who does that? Who asks someone to give away their home?" "Entitled people who have always seen you as a resource rather than a person," Samantha replied bluntly. "I love Uncle William and Aunt Patricia, but they have never treated you fairly, Morgan. Everyone in the family sees it, even if no one talks about it." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of this revelation settling over me. All those years of trying to earn their approval, of making excuses for their behavior, of blaming myself for the distance between us. It had never been about me at all. It had been about their inability to see me as separate from what I could provide for them. "What are you going to do now?" Samantha asked gently. I took a deep breath, wiping away the last of my tears. "I am going to go home, to my penthouse, the one I worked for and earned and love. And then I am going to figure out what kind of relationship, if any, I want to have with my family moving forward." Samantha nodded. "That sounds like a good plan. Are you okay to drive? I can come with you if you want." "I will be all right," I assured her, feeling steadier now. "Thank you for coming to find me. It means a lot." After Samantha returned to the wedding, I drove home in a strange state of emotional numbness. The city lights blurred past my window as I navigated the familiar route to my building. The doorman greeted me with his usual friendly smile, showing no awareness that my world had just been upended. As I rode the elevator to the top floor, I thought about how my parents had never even visited my penthouse. I had invited them multiple times when I first moved in, eager to show them what I had achieved, but they always had excuses. Carlos had come once, only to ask for money to fix his car the same day. I stepped into my home, the place that had become my sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the glittering city skyline and the dark harbor waters beyond. The spacious open floor plan, the gourmet kitchen where I loved to cook, the comfortable furniture I had carefully selected. Every inch of this space represented my hard work, my success, my independence. For the first time, I saw my penthouse not just as a beautiful home, but as a symbol of everything my family had tried to take from me over the years. My confidence, my achievements, my right to define my own success. And now, quite literally, They had tried to take my home as well. As I stood, tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and painful decisions. But tonight, I would reclaim my peace in the home that was mine and mine alone. A week after the wedding disaster, I sat in my home office reviewing quarterly projections when my phone rang. Carlos's name flashed on the screen. I had not spoken to any family members since walking out of the reception, though my phone had been flooded with messages from relatives either condemning my selfish behavior or expressing awkward support. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Hello, Carlos." "Hey, sis," he said, his tone uncharacteristically subdued. "How are you doing?" "I have been better," I replied honestly. "How was the rest of the wedding?" He sighed heavily. "It was weird. Mom cried a lot. Dad got drunk and Rebecca's parents left early. Not exactly the fairy tale ending we planned." An awkward silence stretched between us. I waited, curious to see if he would acknowledge what had happened or if he would pretend everything was normal, as our family had always done when faced with uncomfortable truths. "Look," he finally said, "what Dad did." It was the barest minimum of acknowledgement, but from Carlos, it was something. "Thank you for saying that." Another pause. "So, about the penthouse thing." "Of course." It always came back to what he wanted. "Carlos, I am not giving you my home." "I get that," he said quickly. "But maybe we could work something out? Like, Rebecca and I could rent it from you for a while? Just until we find something else?" Her parents are pretty disappointed that we will not be living where we told them we would. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "You told her parents you would be living in my penthouse before even asking me if that was a possibility." "I know it sounds bad when you put it that way," he admitted. "But Mom and Dad were so sure you would say yes. They said you always help out family." "There is a difference between helping and being taken advantage of," I said firmly. "I am happy to help you and Rebecca find a place within your budget. I could even assist with a down payment if you want to buy something. But my home is not available." I could almost hear him pouting through the phone. "Fine. I guess we will figure something out." No apology for his role in the debacle. No real acknowledgement of how inappropriate the entire situation had been. Just disappointment that he would not be getting what he wanted. "I hope you do," I said. "I wish you and Rebecca happiness, Carlos." "I really do." After hanging up, I called the therapist I had been seeing for the past few days. Dr. Marshall had been recommended by a colleague who knew I was dealing with family issues. In just 3 sessions, she had helped me start to untangle the complex web of guilt, obligation, and manipulation that had characterized my family relationships for years. "My brother just called," I told her when we connected. He half apologized for what happened at the wedding, then immediately asked if he could rent my penthouse instead. Dr. Marshall's voice was calm and steady. "And how did that make you feel?" "Unsurprised," I admitted. "That pattern sounds familiar from what you have told me about your family dynamics," she observed. "Have you thought more about what boundaries you want to establish going forward?" Boundaries. The word still felt foreign to me when applied to family. I had always believed that family meant saying yes, helping out, being there no matter what. The idea that I could set limits on what I would accept from my parents and brother was both liberating and terrifying. "I think I need some distance," I said slowly. "At least until they can acknowledge how inappropriate their behavior has been, not just at the wedding but for years." "That sounds like a healthy first step," Dr. Marshall encouraged. "Remember, boundaries are not punishment. They are protection for your own well-being." After our session, I spent the evening drafting emails to various family members. To distant relatives who had reached out with support, I sent brief but grateful responses. To those who had criticized me, I said nothing. And to my parents, after multiple drafts and deletions, I sent a simple message. "I need space to process what happened at the wedding. Please respect that I do not wish to communicate until I am ready. Morgan." My finger hovered over the send button for several minutes before I finally pressed it. It was the first time in my life I had directly told my parents no and set a clear boundary. It felt both terrifying and empowering. The next morning, I was reviewing contracts in my home office when the doorman called up. "Ms. Riley, your mother is here asking to see you. Should I send her up?" My heart raced. Of course, she would show up unannounced rather than respecting my request for space. "No, thank you, James. Please tell her I am not available." 10 minutes later, my phone exploded with texts from my mother. "I came all this way to see you. This is ridiculous, Morgan. We need to talk about what happened. You cannot shut out your family forever." I turned my phone to silent and returned to my work. 3 hours later, another call from the doorman informed me that she had finally left after sitting in the lobby for hours. That evening, I found a small gift, no acknowledgement of my father's violence. No apology for their inappropriate demands. Just a box of chocolates and a request to pretend nothing had happened, as we had always done. I dropped the gift bag in the trash chute on my way to meet Samantha for dinner. "They will never change," Samantha said after I recounted the day's events. We were sitting at a quiet table in my favorite restaurant, sharing a bottle of wine. "Uncle William and Aunt Patricia have always been this way. The question is, what will you do differently?" "I am working on it," I said honestly. "My therapist says I need to accept that I cannot change them. I can only change how I respond to them." As we finished dinner, my phone lit up with a text from Ethan, the man I had met at the wedding. We had been texting casually throughout the week, initially just checking in on my well-being but gradually sharing more about ourselves. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and refreshingly direct. "Any interest in coffee this weekend?" No pressure, just thought it might be nice to talk without a family crisis happening in the background. I smiled and typed back, "I would like that." Over the next few weeks, I established a new normal. I threw myself into work, continued therapy, and began building a social circle that extended beyond family obligations. Ethan and I met for coffee, which turned into dinner, which turned into regular dates. He was unlike anyone I had dated before, secure in himself and genuinely interested in my thoughts and ambitions. My parents continued their attempts to reconnect on their terms. My father sent an email that came as close to an apology as he was capable of. I should not have lost my temper at the wedding. Let's move past this unfortunate misunderstanding. As if slapping his adult daughter in public was merely a misunderstanding. Carlos and Rebecca eventually found an apartment they could afford in a nice, but not luxury building. My mother could not resist informing me that it was nothing like your place, of course, but they are making do. With each passing day, I felt myself growing stronger, more certain of my worth outside of my family's narrow definition. I began to recognize the patterns that had shaped our relationships for decades and, more importantly, to break free of them. 6 weeks after the wedding, I came home to find my mother sitting in my building lobby. This time, instead of avoiding her, I decided to face the situation head-on. "Morgan," she said, standing as I approached. She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than I remembered. "Can we talk? Please?" I nodded toward the elevators. "We can talk in my home, the one I am not giving away." She flinched slightly but followed me. As we rode up in silence, I realized I was no longer afraid of this conversation. Whatever she had to say, I knew my worth now in a way I never had before. As we entered my penthouse, I watched her eyes widen as she took in the space for the first time. The wall of windows showcasing the harbor view. The elegant furnishings. The artwork I had carefully selected. Her expression shifted from impressed to calculating, and I could almost see her mentally appraising the value. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, maintaining the politeness that had been drilled into me since childhood. She nodded, perching awkwardly on the edge of my sofa. When I returned with 2 cups, she took a small sip before speaking. "Your father and I feel that this situation has gone on long enough," she began, her tone reasonable. "Families disagree sometimes, but in the end, blood is thicker than water." I sat across from her, keeping my expression neutral. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish with this visit, Mom?" She seemed taken aback by my directness. "Well, To put this unpleasantness behind us, of course. To be a family again. The unpleasantness being Dad slapping me in public because I would not give away my home. I clarified. She winced. Your father lost his temper. He knows he should not have done that. But you know how he gets when he is worked up. And you did embarrass us in front of Rebecca's family. And there it was. Even in her attempt at reconciliation, she was placing the blame on me. Some things truly never changed. Mom, I said gently, I am willing to have a relationship with you and Dad going forward, but it needs to be different from what it was before. I need acknowledgement of the patterns that have hurt me, and I need respect for my boundaries. She stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. What patterns? What boundaries? We are your parents, Morgan. We have always wanted what is best for you. What you think is best for me, I corrected. Not necessarily what actually is best for me or what I want for myself. We talked for another hour, going in circles as she tried various approaches to bring me back into the fold without addressing the underlying issues. When she finally left, we had reached no real resolution, but I had maintained my position without anger or defensiveness, which felt like its own kind of victory. As I closed the door behind her, I realized something important. I was no longer desperate for their approval. I could love my family without needing them to validate my choices or my worth. That revelation, more than anything else, felt like true freedom. 6 months after the wedding incident, I stood on my rooftop terrace, watching the sun set over the harbor. The past half year had brought changes I could never have anticipated on that tumultuous day when my father's hand connected with my cheek. My penthouse had undergone a transformation, much like myself. I had hired an interior designer to help me reimagine the space, replacing furniture that had been selected to impress others with pieces that brought me joy. The formal dining room had become a combination library and meditation space. The guest bedroom that had never hosted family now housed my growing collection of art and a comfortable daybed where I could read and relax. For the first time, my home truly felt like a sanctuary rather than a symbol of achievement to wave in front of my family. It was mine in a deeper sense now, reflecting my authentic self rather than the successful persona I had constructed to earn approval that never came. My phone chimed with a text from Ethan, running 5 minutes late. Traffic on the bridge. Cannot wait to see you. I smiled, feeling the now familiar warmth that thoughts of him brought. Our relationship had developed slowly and thoughtfully over the past months. He respected my boundaries, celebrated my successes without jealousy, and most importantly, saw me for who I was rather than what I could provide. It was a new experience to be valued for myself alone. As I waited for him to arrive, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. My relationship with my parents remained complicated, but had evolved into something more honest. After several false starts and uncomfortable conversations, we had established a tentative new normal. 2 months after our failed attempt at reconciliation in my penthouse, my mother had called with news that my father had been diagnosed with high blood pressure. The doctor had warned him about stress and anger management. For the first time, there seemed to be a consequence for his temper that he could not ignore or justify away. That health scare had led to my father reluctantly agreeing to attend a family therapy session. It had been tense and difficult, with my father resistant to acknowledging any problematic patterns. But the simple act of having a neutral third party present who did not automatically take his side had shifted something fundamental in our dynamic. We were not close, and perhaps we never would be, but we had established a more honest relationship. I visited once a month for a brief lunch, maintained clear boundaries about what I would and would not discuss, and no longer felt guilty when I said no to requests that crossed those boundaries. My relationship with Carlos had undergone its own evolution. 2 months after the wedding, he had called me in a panic. Rebecca was pregnant, an unplanned but not unwelcome surprise. Their small apartment suddenly felt inadequate, and they were struggling to figure out next steps. I am not giving you my penthouse, I had said immediately, a reflex born from our last conversation. I know that, he had replied, surprising me. I am not calling to ask for your place. I do not know what to do, and you have always been good at figuring things out. That conversation had marked a turning point. For the first time, Carlos had reached out not for money or things, but for guidance. I had helped him create a financial plan, connected him with a realtor friend who specialized in helping young families find affordable homes in good school districts, and offered genuine support without sacrificing my own needs. Last week, Carlos and Rebecca had closed on a modest but charming house in a suburban neighborhood with excellent schools. I had given them a housewarming gift of a weekend getaway so they could have one last trip before the baby arrived, along with a check to start a college fund for their child. It was generous, but not self-sacrificing, a distinction I was finally learning to recognize. The elevator chimed, pulling me from my thoughts. Ethan stepped out onto the terrace, his smile warming me more than the lingering sun. He handed me a small bouquet of wildflowers, knowing I preferred them to expensive arrangements. Sorry I am late, he said, kissing me softly. The traffic was terrible. Worth the wait, I replied, taking his hand as we settled into the comfortable outdoor furniture to enjoy the view. As we talked about our days, I felt a deep sense of contentment. 6 months ago, I could not have imagined feeling this peaceful, this settled in my own skin. The crisis at Carlos's wedding had been painful but necessary, forcing me to confront patterns I had accepted for far too long. I had an interesting call today, I told Ethan as we finished the dinner we had prepared together. My cousin Samantha wants to start a tech business focused on healthcare applications. She asked if I would consider mentoring her. That sounds perfect for you, he said. You would be an amazing mentor. I think I would, I agreed, no longer feeling the need to downplay my accomplishments or expertise. We are meeting next week to discuss her business plan. The future stretched before me, full of possibilities that were of my own choosing rather than reactions to family expectations. I had learned that standing up for myself did not mean losing my family. It meant creating healthier relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. Later that evening, as Ethan and I relaxed on the sofa with glasses of wine, he asked a question that made me pause. Do you ever regret what happened at the wedding? How everything went down? I considered the question carefully. I regret that it happened the way it did, in public, causing embarrassment to everyone involved. But I do not regret standing my ground. That moment, as painful as it was, forced me to recognize and address patterns that had been hurting me for years. So no, I cannot truly regret something that ultimately led to so much growth and healing. He nodded, understanding. Sometimes the most painful moments are the ones that lead to the greatest transformations. As I looked around my beautiful penthouse, at the life I had built for myself, at the man who respected and valued me for who I was, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey had not been easy, but it had been necessary. I had learned that true family supports your growth rather than stunting it for their convenience. That love should lift you up, not diminish you. That boundaries are not selfish, but essential for healthy relationships. And perhaps most importantly, that I was worthy of respect simply for being who I was, not for what I could give or do for others. My father's slap at my brother's wedding had been a painful ending to one chapter of my life, but it had also been the beginning of something new and infinitely more authentic. For that unexpected gift, I could almost be grateful. If you have ever had to set difficult boundaries with family, please share your experience in the comments below. How did you find the courage to stand up for yourself? What helped you maintain those boundaries even when it was difficult? Remember that you are not alone in these struggles, and your story might help someone else find their own strength. Thank you for listening to my journey, and please like, subscribe, and share if this resonated with you.
I'm Abigail Turner, 32 years old, and I'm standing outside the gleaming Westbrook Plaza Hotel, clutching an invitation to my sister Julia's corporate holiday party. My stomach knots as I check my simple navy dress. We've barely spoken in years, yet here I am. When I finally enter, Julia's eyes meet mine for a split second before darting away, barely acknowledging my presence. She's always been competitive, but tonight feels different. I watch as she anxiously glances at the empty seat marked for her CEO. Something tells me this reunion is about to become unforgettable. If you're enjoying this story already, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button as I reveal what happened next at this corporate disaster. The December air bit at my cheeks as I stood outside the hotel, memories flooding back. Julia and I weren't always strangers. We shared a bedroom for 16 years in our modest home in Milwaukee. But even then, there was always this undercurrent of competition that defined our relationship. I adjusted my simple gold necklace, a stark contrast to the statement jewelry I knew would be adorning necks inside. My company, Access Tech Solutions, had grown from a tiny startup I launched in my garage to a respected player in the adaptive technology industry. We created software and hardware solutions for people with disabilities, focusing on making technology accessible to everyone. But looking at me in my sensible shoes and modest car, most people would never guess. That was by design. I believed in the work, not the trappings of success. Julia, however, had always been the opposite. "Abby, you came?" My mother's voice rang in my ear through my phone. "Did you find the place okay?" "Yes, Mom. I'm just taking a minute before going in," I replied, watching expensively dressed people streaming through the hotel's revolving doors. "Your sister really wants you there, honey. This is a big night for her." I bit back a sigh. Mom always saw what she wanted to see in our relationship. The family dinner last month had been her idea, a not-so-subtle intervention to repair the sisterly bond that had frayed to nearly nothing. Julia had reluctantly mentioned this holiday party, and Mom had practically RSVP'd for me on the spot. "I know, Mom. I'm going in now. Remember, she's up for that big promotion. Having family support means a lot." Family support. As if Julia had been supportive when I mortgaged everything I owned to start Access Tech, or when I worked 18-hour days for 3 years straight to get it off the ground. But I pushed those thoughts away. Tonight wasn't about our past. It was about trying to find a way forward. I handed my coat to the attendant and stepped into the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over circular tables draped in white linen. A string quartet played softly in one corner. Corporate logos for Pinnacle Innovations. Julia's employer adorned strategic locations throughout the space. I spotted Julia immediately. She always did know how to command attention in a room. Her emerald dress complemented her auburn hair, which was swept into an elegant updo. She stood among a circle of colleagues, champagne flute in hand, laughing at something someone had said. I took a deep breath and approached. Julia's smile faltered when she saw me, just for a millisecond, but I caught it. "You made it," she said, her tone revealing neither pleasure nor displeasure. "Everyone, this is my sister. Not my sister Abigail, or my sister who runs her own company. Just my sister. As if I were an extension of her lacking identity of my own. "Nice to meet you all," I said, smiling warmly at the circle of curious faces. "I'm Abigail. Abby works with computers too," Julia added with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Different side of the industry than us." One man in an expensive suit extended his hand. "Thomas Wells, marketing director. What firm are you with?" Before I could answer, Julia cut in. "Oh, Abby's not with a firm. She does her own thing. Very small scale." She turned to me. "Drink? They have that sweet wine you like." I hadn't mentioned wine preferences to Julia in at least 5 years. "I'll get something from the bar, thanks," I said, needing a moment to regroup. As I walked away, I heard Julia smoothly transition the conversation to the new Pinnacle project she was spearheading. Same old Julia, making sure the spotlight never strayed too far from her. The bartender handed me a sparkling water, and I took a moment to observe the room. Men and women in designer clothes chatted in groups, their laughter occasionally rising above the music. I recognized the easy confidence of people accustomed to moving in these circles. While I had achieved success in my own right, this world of corporate politics and posturing had never been my natural habitat. My phone buzzed with a text from my lead developer, Zoe. New accessibility engine testing complete. Results amazing. Call when you can. Work news normally would have thrilled me, but tonight it just highlighted the vast differences between Julia's world and mine. Her gold-plated corporate ladder climbing versus my mission-driven enterprise. I tucked my phone away, determined to give this evening a fair chance. You must be Julia's sister. A woman with a Pinnacle name badge appeared beside me. I'm Meredith from HR. Abigail, nice to meet you. Julia talks about you sometimes, Meredith said, though her tone suggested those talks weren't entirely complimentary. All good things, I hope, I replied with a practiced smile. Meredith's polite laugh told me everything I needed to know. It's unusual for employees to bring family to these events, usually just spouses. Julia and I are trying to spend more time together. I explained, not mentioning our mother's persistent orchestration. That's sweet. Family is so important, Meredith said, though her eyes were already scanning the room for more advantageous conversation partners. Excuse me, I see someone I need to speak with. And just like that, I was alone again, sipping sparkling water at my sister's corporate party, wondering how long I needed to stay before making a polite exit. I glanced at Julia, now holding court with a larger group, periodically checking the entrance as if waiting for someone important to arrive. The night was young, but I already felt the familiar weight of being Julia's less interesting, less important sister settling back onto my shoulders. I straightened my posture and reminded myself that I had nothing to prove to these people, even if Julia seemed determined to prove something to them about me. So, what exactly do you do again? Asked a woman in a sleek black dress, swirling her martini as she gave my outfit a once-over. I'd been attempting to blend into the background near a large potted plant when Julia had steered this group of her colleagues in my direction. I run a technology company focused on accessibility solutions, I answered, trying to keep it simple. Julia laughed a little too loudly. Abby means she helps fix computer problems for people who aren't tech-savvy, like a help desk but freelance. She turned to me with a tight smile. Isn't that right? I felt my cheeks warm. Actually, Access Tech develops adaptive software and hardware for people with disabilities. We just completed a major project that allows visually impaired users to navigate complex websites with voice commands. A man in the group raised his eyebrows with what seemed like genuine interest. That sounds fascinating. Is there a growing market for that kind of specialized technology? Julia stepped slightly in front of me, physically inserting herself between me and her colleague. Speaking of growing markets, Harold, did you see the projections for the Asian expansion? I worked on those numbers all weekend. The conversation was efficiently redirected, and I was once again relegated to the periphery. I caught snippets of corporate jargon as Julia dominated the discussion, occasionally throwing glances my way as if to make sure I was witnessing her importance. Julia, your sister was about to tell us about her business, Harold said, attempting to circle back. Oh, it's not really a business, Julia said with a dismissive laugh. It's more of a passion project, isn't it, Abby? Like when we were kids and you'd take apart Dad's radio to see how it worked. Actually, we employ 37 people now, I said quietly. Julia's eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite identify. Annoyance? Surprise. She quickly recovered. 37. Wow. When did that happen? Last I heard, it was just you and a couple of college interns. We've grown quite a bit in the past few years, I replied, aware that everyone was watching our exchange with interest. Well, good for you, Julia said in a tone that suggested she was humoring a child. But Harold, you simply must hear about the presentation I gave to the executive committee last week. Frederick himself said it was refreshingly innovative. Frederick? That must be the CEO she kept anxiously looking for. I considered confronting her right then, calling out her dismissive behavior. But a memory flashed in my mind, our 8th grade science fair. I'd spent weeks building a working model of a solar-powered water filtration system. Julia had thrown together a volcano with baking soda and vinegar the night before. When the judges came around, she'd stepped in front of my display, claiming loudly that the really cool explosion was coming from her project. She got more attention, but I got the blue ribbon. Some patterns never changed. I excused myself to visit the restroom, needing a moment alone. As I walked away, I heard Julia loudly ask, "Did I mention I'm being considered for the director position, youngest in company history?" The bathroom was mercifully empty. I leaned against the marble countertop, studying my reflection in the mirror. My blonde hair was pulled back in a simple updo, my makeup minimal. Nothing like Julia's glamorous appearance. But then I'd never wanted to be Julia. I'd only wanted her respect, or at the very least her honesty. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Zoe. "Forbes wants to interview you about the patent approval. Call ASAP, the patent." We'd been waiting months for that approval. It was a significant milestone for Access Tech 1 that would likely lead to major new contracts. For a moment, I was tempted to return to the party and share the news, to see the look on Julia's face when she realized her help desk sister had just secured a game-changing patent. But what would that accomplish? Would it fix years of competitive undermining? Would it suddenly make Julia see me as an equal rather than an afterthought? No. This wasn't about proving myself to Julia or her colleagues. I'd already proven myself in ways that mattered to me. I tucked my phone away without responding and returned to the party, determined to get through the evening with Grace intact. As I re-entered the ballroom, I noticed Julia deep in conversation with a stern-looking woman who appeared to be a senior executive. Julia's body language was deferential, eager to please. The woman nodded curtly before walking away, and Julia's shoulders momentarily sagged with what looked like relief. "Everything okay?" I asked as I approached. Julia startled, then quickly composed herself. "Fine." That was Catherine, VP of Strategic Development. She says the CEO is definitely coming tonight. Her eyes darted to the entrance again. He rarely attends these events. Everyone's on edge. "Including you?" I asked gently. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "I have nothing to be nervous about. My performance reviews have been stellar." A server passed with a tray of champagne, and Julia snatched a glass, downing half of it in one go. "You should probably find somewhere to sit. The speeches will be starting soon." I felt a pang of sympathy for my sister. Despite her behavior, I could see the pressure she was under. "Julia, I could leave if my being here is making things more stressful for you." For a brief moment, something like vulnerability crossed her features, but it was quickly replaced by her professional mask. "Don't be silly. Stay. Just try not to, talk too much about your little business. These people are focused on enterprise-level solutions." And just like that, any sympathy I felt evaporated. I nodded stiffly and moved toward an empty table near the back of the room, wondering if I could slip out after the speeches without anyone noticing. I found myself wedged between a man who introduced himself as procurement, you wouldn't understand it, and a woman who hadn't looked up from her phone since I sat down. The evening had progressed from uncomfortable to unbearable as Julia's behavior became increasingly obvious. "Oh, Abby still drives that old Honda," she announced loudly to a group as I passed by the bar. "She's very frugal. Aren't you, Abby?" My old Honda was a 3-year-old hybrid. Julia leased a new luxury car every 2 years. Later, when someone asked about my company, "It's the cutest little operation. She works out of that converted garage space, right, Abby? So startup chic." Our converted garage space was actually 15,000 square feet of office space in downtown Milwaukee, but Julia had never bothered to visit. Each comment built upon the last, creating a caricature of me as Julia's quaint, somewhat backward sister who was dabbling in business while Julia conquered the corporate world. I kept my responses brief and pleasant, not wanting to create a scene. But inside each dismissive remark stung. "What exactly do you do at that little computer repair shop?" Julia asked loudly as I was speaking with an IT director who had shown genuine interest in accessible technology. "It's not a repair shop, Julia," I corrected quietly. As I was explaining, we develop adaptive technologies that make digital tools accessible to people with disabilities. We've recently expanded into artificial intelligence applications that can predict user needs based on previous interactions. The IT director leaned forward. "That's fascinating. Are you working with machine learning models for that prediction engine?" "Yes. We've developed a proprietary algorithm that can distinguish between intentional and accidental input, which is particularly useful for users with motor control challenges," I began. "Oh, Abby loves getting into the technical weeds," Julia interrupted with a laugh. "But Michael, you simply must tell her about Pinnacle's acquisition plans. Abby's always looking for inspiration for her little venture." Michael looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. "Well, I'm not sure how much I can share about that publicly." Of course, Julia said with a conspiratorial wink. "We're all family here. Speaking of which, Abby, what on earth possessed you to wear those shoes to a formal event?" I glanced down at my navy blue pumps, perfectly appropriate if not cutting-edge fashion. "These are fine, Julia, if you say so. I keep telling her she needs to upgrade her wardrobe if she wants to be taken seriously in business meetings, but she insists comfort is more important than appearance." Julia was speaking to Michael, but looking at me with a tight smile. Before I could respond, someone bumped into me from behind, splashing red wine down the side of my dress. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." It was Julia's assistant, Diane, looking mortified, but not entirely convincing. "It's fine," I said, grabbing a napkin from the table. "Just an accident." "Diane, would you show my sister to the restroom and maybe find her a place to wait while that dries? Somewhere out of the way. The CEO will be arriving soon, and we want to make a good impression." Julia's tone made it clear that my wine-stained dress did not constitute a good impression. "Of course, Miss Taylor." Diane gestured for me to follow her. "It's really fine," I protested. "I can manage." "I insist," Julia said firmly. "We can't have you walking around like that when Frederick arrives." As Diane led me away, I heard Julia loudly explaining to those nearby, "My sister, so clumsy since we were kids. Remember when she knocked over the entire display at my college graduation ceremony? Some things never change." I had never attended Julia's college graduation. Our father had been ill, and I had stayed home to care for him while Mom and Julia went to the ceremony. It was a completely fabricated story designed to diminish me further in front of her colleagues. In the bathroom, I did my best to blot the wine from my dress. The stain wasn't as bad as it initially seemed, but it was still visible. "Ms. Taylor suggested you might want to wait in the lobby until the speeches are over," Diane said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The CEO is very particular about these events." "I'm sure he is," I replied, "but I'll be rejoining the party. My sister was kind enough to invite me after all." Diane looked uncomfortable. "She was very specific about you waiting elsewhere." "Was she?" I met Diane's eyes in the mirror. "And do you always do exactly what Julia tells you to?" A flash of something that might have been respect crossed Diane's face. "Not always," she admitted, "but often enough to keep my job." I softened. "I understand. But I'm not going to hide in the lobby because of a small wine stain. I'll take responsibility if your CEO is offended by my appearance." Diane nodded and left me alone in the bathroom. I took a deep breath, remembering a similar incident from our childhood. I was 12, Julia 14. I had been selected for a regional science competition, and Julia had accidentally spilled orange juice all over my presentation board the morning of the event. I had stayed up all night remaking it while she slept soundly. The next day I took second place. Julia had never forgiven me for not failing. I straightened my shoulders and returned to the ballroom, determined not to let history repeat itself. I wouldn't be hidden away or diminished wine stain or no wine stain. As I re-entered the room, I heard Julia's voice amplified by a microphone. She was standing at the front of the room, glass raised in what appeared to be a toast. Her eyes found mine as I slipped in at the back, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes spread across her face. "And speaking of special guests," she continued, "I'd like to acknowledge my sister who made a rare appearance outside her comfort zone tonight." All eyes turned to me, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. This wasn't going to be good. "There she is, my +1 mistake!" Julia's voice rang out through the speakers, followed by a ripple of laughter from the crowd. I froze near the back wall, acutely aware of every eye in the room on me. "Come on up here, Abby. Don't be shy." I remained where I was, my feet seemingly glued to the floor. Julia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Always the wallflower, my little sister," she continued. "Some of you have had the pleasure of meeting Abigail tonight. For those who haven't, she runs a charming little hobby business out of a garage." More laughter, though I noticed a few uncomfortable glances exchanged among the crowd. "She's always been the family tinkerer. Remember that laptop you tried to build from spare parts, Abby? The one that caught fire during the family Christmas?" Julia was on a roll now, encouraged by the audience reaction. Firefighters are not the traditional holiday guests, but Abby always did like to stand out. That incident had happened, but it was Julia who had spilled eggnog on the circuit board after I told her not to bring drinks near my workstation. I had been 17, building a custom computer to donate to a local community center. "Of course we all have to start somewhere," Julia continued in a faux generous tone. "I began in the Pinnacle mailroom, if you can believe it. Now look at me." She gestured to herself grandly. While some of us are content with small dreams and smaller achievements, others reach for the stars. The implication was clear. I was small, insignificant, underachieving. Julia was the success story. But we can't all be corporate climbers, can we? Some of us have to stay grounded, providing those little services that make other people's successes possible. So here's to my sister who's always been, well, exactly who she is. Julia raised her glass higher, and the crowd followed suit, many looking uncertain about what exactly they were toasting. I felt a burning humiliation spread from my chest to my face. Years of competitive jabs had culminated in this public takedown, all to make Julia look superior in front of her colleagues and bosses. I could have walked out. I could have grabbed the microphone and set the record straight. I could have listed Access Tech's achievements, the lives we'd changed, the millions in revenue we generated. But something held me back. Some part of me recognized that Julia's behavior came from a place of deep insecurity, and publicly shaming her would only deepen the rift between us. So I smiled, a tight, controlled smile that took every ounce of my self-restraint, but a smile nonetheless. And I gave a small acknowledging wave to the crowd. Julia's expression flickered with what might have been disappointment. Had she been hoping for a scene, for me to storm out or break down in tears? Either reaction would have reinforced her narrative of me as emotional and unprofessional. "And now," Julia continued, recovering quickly, "we await the arrival of our esteemed CEO, Frederick Spencer, who I'm told will be joining us momentarily. As the team lead on the Richardson account, I've had the privilege of working closely with Frederick on our latest acquisition strategy." She was back in her element now, name-dropping and self-promoting. I stood frozen in place, the sting of her public ridicule still fresh, wondering how many more minutes I needed to endure before I could make a dignified exit. Just then, a murmur rippled through the crowd. The main doors had opened and a group of people in expensive suits entered. The energy in the room shifted immediately, conversations hushing as attention turned to the newcomers. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced a woman who had taken the microphone from Julia. "Please welcome our CEO, Frederick Spencer, and the executive leadership team." Applause filled the room as a tall man with silver hair at his temples strode in, flanked by several serious-looking executives. Julia's face lit up with a practiced smile as she stepped forward, clearly eager to be among the first to greet him. Frederick Spencer scanned the room with the calculated gaze of someone used to being the most important person present. And then, unexpectedly, his eyes landed on me standing quietly at the back of the room with my wine-stained dress. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Frederick Spencer stopped abruptly. The executives with him nearly collided with one another at his sudden halt. His expression transformed from polite corporate neutrality to genuine surprise, and then astonishingly to what appeared to be respect. "Abigail Turner!" he called out, his voice carrying across the now silent room. I gave a small nod, aware that every person in the ballroom had turned to stare at me, including Julia, whose smile had frozen on her face. And then Frederick Spencer, CEO of Pinnacle Innovations, did something that no one in that room expected. He walked directly toward me, bypassing Julia and all the other Pinnacle employees who had been vying for his attention. When he reached me, he extended his hand, and with a slight bow of his head said, "Good evening, ma'am. This is an unexpected honor." The room fell into a shocked silence so complete you could have heard a champagne bubble pop. Frederick Spencer, the notoriously difficult-to-impress CEO of Pinnacle Innovations, was standing in front of me with genuine respect in his eyes, while Julia remained frozen at the microphone, her mouth slightly open. "Mr. Spencer," I replied, shaking his hand. "It's nice to meet you in person at last." "The pleasure is entirely mine," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet room. "I've been following your work in adaptive technology for years. Your recent breakthrough with the neural interface for mobility-impaired users is nothing short of revolutionary." From the corner of my eye, I could see Julia's face cycling through expressions, confusion, disbelief, and then the dawning horror of realization. "Everyone," Frederick announced, turning to address the room while keeping a respectful distance from me. "For those who don't know, we are in the presence of one of the most innovative minds in accessible technology, Abigail Turner, founder and CEO of Access Tech Solutions." Murmurs spread through the crowd. I could see Julia's colleagues exchanging glances, some looking at their phones, presumably searching for information about me and my company. "In fact," Frederick continued, "Pinnacle has just finalized a partnership agreement with Access Tech that will integrate their accessibility software into all our future products. This collaboration represents a $20 million investment from Pinnacle, our largest ever in the accessibility space. $20 million. The deal we'd been negotiating for months had gone through. I had been planning to tell my team tomorrow, but apparently the news had reached Pinnacle's upper management first. Julia's champagne glass was still raised in her frozen hand, the remnants of her mocking toast now a tableau of irony. Her eyes met mine across the room, wide with shock. "Ms. Turner's company has grown from a startup to an industry leader in just 6 years," Frederick was saying to the rapt audience. "Their patented adaptive technologies are being integrated into products used by millions of people worldwide. We're not just talking about a successful small business. We're talking about a company that's changing how people with disabilities interact with technology." One by one, the executives who had entered with Frederick approached me, introducing themselves and expressing admiration for Access Tech's innovations. Catherine, the VP who had spoken with Julia earlier, was particularly enthusiastic. "Your predictive text algorithm for users with cognitive challenges is brilliant," she said. "My nephew has dyslexia and uses your software. It's changed his academic experience completely." Throughout these interactions, I maintained my composure, thanking everyone for their kind words, while trying not to draw attention to Julia's earlier mischaracterization of my work. But the damage had been done. Everyone in that room now understood that the hobby business Julia had mocked was actually a multi-million-dollar enterprise worthy of Pinnacle's significant investment. Thomas Wells, the marketing director I'd met earlier, approached with a chagrined expression.
I apologize for not recognizing your name earlier, Ms. Turner. Your reputation precedes you in the industry.
No apology necessary, I assured him. I don't tend to advertise my position.
Unlike some,
he murmured with a pointed glance toward Julia, who had finally lowered her champagne glass and was attempting to regain her composure. I watched as Julia made her way through the crowd, moving toward our little group with a determined smile fixed on her face. When she reached us, she slipped her arm through mine in a gesture of sudden sisterly affection.
Frederick, I see you've met my brilliant sister,
she said, her voice overly bright. I was just telling everyone about her amazing company. Frederick raised an eyebrow.
Yes, I caught the end of your introduction. Quite the family talent you two share.
Julia's grip on my arm tightened almost painfully. Abby and I have always been close. I've supported her work from the beginning. I could have contradicted her, could have mentioned her years of dismissing my company as a hobby, but what would be the point? Everyone in the room had witnessed her mockery, followed by the CEO's respect for my work. The contrast spoke volumes.
Ms. Turner,
Frederick continued, addressing me rather than Julia.
We'd be honored if you would consider leading a panel at our technology conference next month.
Your insights on accessible design would be invaluable to our development team. I'd be happy to, I replied.
Wonderful,
Frederick smiled. My assistant will contact you directly to arrange the details. Julia's boss, a serious woman I'd noticed watching our exchange with interest, approached our group. Julia, a word, she said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. As Julia reluctantly detached herself from my arm and followed her boss to a quiet corner, I found myself engaged in meaningful conversations about accessibility in technology. For the first time that evening, I was being seen for who I actually was, not who Julia had portrayed me to be. Your vision for technology that adapts to the user, rather than forcing the user to adapt to technology, is exactly the direction Pinnacle needs to move in, said a software engineer named Michael. Would you be open to consulting with our development team on our new interface design? Of course, I replied. Access Tech is always looking for opportunities to expand our impact. As the evening progressed, I noticed a steady stream of people approaching me with business cards and questions about Access Tech. Meanwhile, Julia stood with her boss, nodding repeatedly, her expression tense. When her boss finally walked away, Julia remained where she was, seemingly unsure of her next move. I excused myself from my conversation and approached her. It seemed cruel to leave her stranded in her moment of professional embarrassment, regardless of her treatment of me. Julia, I said quietly. She turned to me, her eyes flashing with a mixture of emotions. Congratulations, she said, her voice tight. You've managed to completely humiliate me in front of my entire company. Are you happy now? I blinked, taken aback by her accusation. Humiliate you, Julia? I didn't do anything. Exactly, she hissed, keeping her voice low but intense. You sat there and let me make a fool of myself. You knew about the Pinnacle deal. You knew the CEO would recognize you. Why didn't you say something? I stared at her, incredulous. When was I supposed to tell you, Julia, between you introducing me as your unemployed sister or mocking my hobby business? You never once asked me a genuine question about my work or my life. You were too busy creating a narrative that made you look superior. Julia's face flushed. That's not fair. I was just having a little fun with the toasts. It's what we do at these events. Publicly humiliating family members is a corporate tradition. I must have missed that chapter in business school. For a moment, Julia looked like she might argue further, but then her shoulders sagged slightly. My boss just told me the Richardson account is being reassigned. Apparently, someone with more diplomacy and professional judgment would be better suited to lead a major client relationship. I felt a pang of sympathy despite everything.
I'm sorry to hear that. Are you?
She looked at me skeptically.
Yes, Julia, I am. Despite what you might think, I've never wanted to see you fail. I've only wanted you to see me clearly, to acknowledge my work with the same respect I've always given yours.
Julia glanced around the room where several people were watching our interaction with undisguised interest. I should go mingle. Damage control. She started to move away, then paused.
Your company really closed a $20 million deal with Pinnacle.
I nodded.
And you never thought to mention that when I invited you to a Pinnacle event.
You didn't invite me, Julia. Mom did.
And no, I didn't think to mention it because in the 6 years I've been building Access Tech, you've never once shown genuine interest in what I do.
Julia had no response to that. With a tight nod, she walked away, immediately approaching a group of executives with her professional smile firmly in place. I decided it was time for me to leave. I'd experienced enough emotional whiplash for one evening. As I collected my coat from the attendant, Frederick Spencer approached again.
Leaving so soon, Ms. Turner? The night is young.
It's been quite an evening, I replied diplomatically. I have an early meeting tomorrow. Frederick nodded understandingly.
Of course. Before you go, I wanted to personally thank you for the work you're doing. My daughter uses a screen reader due to her visual impairment, and your software has made a tremendous difference in her ability to work independently.
I hadn't known about his daughter. Suddenly, his interest in Access Tech took on a more personal dimension.
I'm very glad to hear that,
I said sincerely. That's exactly why we do what we do.
I look forward to our company's collaboration,
he said, shaking my hand again.
And I hope to see more of you at future Pinnacle events, perhaps under more straightforward circumstances.
His knowing look told me he had understood exactly what had transpired earlier with Julia's toast. I smiled appreciatively and made my exit, stepping into the cool night air with a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite sort through. Relief vindication, sadness for my sister, hope for our new business partnership, and beneath it all, a lingering question about whether Julia and I would ever find our way to a genuine relationship. As my car pulled away from the hotel, my phone lit up with a text. It was from Julia. We need to talk. I sighed deeply. Yes, we certainly did. 3 days passed before I heard from Julia again. The text message saying, "We need to talk," hung unanswered between us, a digital representation of our complicated relationship. I had decided to let her make the next move to reach out when she was ready.
In the meantime, I returned to Milwaukee and immersed myself in work. The Pinnacle deal was now public knowledge, and our office was buzzing with excitement. $20 million meant we could accelerate several research projects and hire additional staff. It was a game changer for Access Tech, and I should have been completely focused on the opportunities ahead. Instead, I found myself distracted by thoughts of Julia replaying our childhood moments alongside the events of the holiday party. Had I missed opportunities to bridge the gap between us? Had I contributed to the competitive dynamic by withdrawing rather than confronting her behavior directly?
Earth to Abigail.
Zoe waved a hand in front of my face during our morning meeting. You were miles away. Everything okay?
Just thinking about the implementation timeline for the Pinnacle integration. I lied, shuffling the papers in front of me. Zoe gave me a skeptical look but didn't press the issue.
Well, as I was saying, the Forbes interview is scheduled for Thursday. They want to focus on the patent and the Pinnacle partnership.
Thanks, Zoe.
Let's prep for that tomorrow.
After the meeting, I retreated to my office, a modest space with large windows overlooking downtown Milwaukee. Unlike the corner offices of corporate executives, my workspace prioritized function over status. Prototypes of our latest adaptive devices lined one wall, while user feedback formed a collage on another. This was where I felt most at home, surrounded by the tangible evidence of Access Tech's mission.
My phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number with a New York area code. Abigail Turner, I answered. Ms. Turner, this is Catherine Simmons from Pinnacle Innovations. The voice belonged to the VP who had spoken with Julia at the party. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Not at all, Ms. Simmons. What can I do for you? First, please call me Catherine. After all, we're partners now, she said with a warmth that surprised me. I wanted to personally follow up on our conversation at the holiday party. Your insights on accessible design have sparked quite a discussion among our development team. We chatted for several minutes about potential collaboration opportunities beyond the formal partnership agreement. As the conversation wound down, Catherine's tone shifted slightly. On a more personal note, I wanted to apologize for what happened at the party. Your sister's presentation of your work was, well, it wasn't accurate or professional. I felt a surge of protectiveness toward Julia despite everything. Family dynamics can be complicated, I said diplomatically. Indeed, Catherine agreed. Still, I want you to know that Julia's behavior doesn't reflect Pinnacle's values of respect and integrity. We've had a discussion with her about it. I winced imagining Julia's humiliation at being reprimanded because of me. I appreciate your concern, but I hope this won't negatively impact Julia's position at Pinnacle. She's very talented. She is, Catherine acknowledged. And no, her job isn't in jeopardy, but this incident has given us insight into areas where she needs professional development, particularly around team dynamics and collaborative leadership. After we said our goodbyes, I sat staring at my phone, wondering if I should reach out to Julia. Before I could decide, an email notification appeared on my screen. From Julia. The subject line read simply, "I'm sorry." I clicked it open with trepidation. Abby, I don't know how to begin this email. "I'm sorry" seems inadequate for what happened at the holiday party, but it's the truth. I am sorry. My boss suggested I take some time to reflect on my professional conduct, which is corporate speak for, "You really messed up." She's right. I did mess up. Not just professionally, but personally. As your sister. I told myself I was just having fun with the toast, but that's not true. I deliberately tried to diminish you and your achievements because I felt threatened. I've always felt threatened by you, Abby. You've always seemed to succeed so effortlessly at the things that matter, while I've had to fight for every inch of recognition. That's not an excuse. It's just context for a pattern of behavior I'm only now recognizing. I'd like to meet and talk in person if you're willing. I'll be in Milwaukee next weekend for a client meeting. Perhaps we could have dinner. Julia. I read the email 3 times, searching for the typical Julia deflections or subtle jabs, but there weren't any. It seemed genuine if cautious. I replied with a simple acceptance of her dinner invitation, suggesting a quiet restaurant near my office. Then I turned my attention back to work, trying not to get my hopes up about a potential breakthrough in our relationship. The weekend arrived quickly. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, a habit from years of business meetings. To my surprise, Julia was already there, seated at a corner table away from the main dining area. She looked different somehow. Less polished, more authentic. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. She stood when she saw me, an uncertain smile on her face. "Abby," she said awkwardly, extending her hand before switching to a brief hug. "Thanks for coming." "Of course," I replied, taking my seat across from her. "How was your client meeting?" "Productive," she said. "But that's not why I'm here. I owe you a real apology, Abby. Face to face." I nodded, giving her space to continue. "What I did at the holiday party was inexcusable," she began. "I deliberately misrepresented you and your work to make myself look better. It was petty, unprofessional, and cruel." "Yes, it was," I agreed quietly. Julia looked slightly taken aback by my direct agreement, but continued. "After you left, Frederick Spencer asked me how long I'd known about the Pinnacle partnership with Access Tech. When I admitted I hadn't known about it at all, he seemed genuinely confused. He assumed, since you're my sister, that I must have been instrumental in facilitating the connection.
She took a sip of water, her hand trembling slightly. Do you know how that felt? To have the CEO of my company assume I would be aware of and involved in a $20 million deal with my own sister's company, and to have to admit that I knew so little about your work that I'd been publicly mocking it minutes earlier. I can imagine it was difficult, I said, feeling a mix of sympathy and vindication. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it, Julia said with a hollow laugh. But it also made me realize something important. The problem isn't that you're somehow trying to outshine me. The problem is that I've been so focused on competition that I've completely missed who you actually are and what you've accomplished. Her words hung between us, a rare moment of self-awareness from my usually defensive sister. Would you like to see what I actually do? I asked impulsively. Julia looked up surprised. What do you mean? Access tech. Our office. Our work. Would you like to see it? Now? Why not? It's Saturday, so it'll be quiet. Just us. Julia hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'd like that very much. We paid for our barely touched drinks and walked the 3 blocks to the Access Tech building. As we approached the modern glass and steel structure, I saw Julia taking it in with new eyes. This is your garage space, she asked, clearly surprised by the scale. We outgrew the garage about 5 years ago, I replied with a small smile. Inside, I gave her a tour of our development labs, testing facilities, and collaborative workspaces. I showed her prototypes of our latest adaptive technologies, explaining how each was designed to address specific accessibility challenges. This is our pride and joy at the moment, I said, demonstrating a sleek headset with neural sensors. It allows people with limited mobility to control digital interfaces using only their thoughts. The technology has applications beyond accessibility too, which is partly why Pinnacle was interested in the partnership. Julia listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that revealed both her business acumen and her genuine interest. As we concluded the tour in my office, she stopped in front of the wall of user feedback. Access Tech gave me back my independence, she read from one letter. For the first time in 15 years, I can work again without assistance. She turned to me, her eyes shining with what looked like unshed tears. This is what you do, Abby. You change lives. I nodded, suddenly emotional myself. That's the goal. And I reduced it to fixing computers for people who aren't tech savvy, she said, shaking her head in dismay. I am so sorry. Why, Julia? I asked the question that had been haunting me for years. Why has it always been a competition between us? Julia sank into a chair, looking out at the Milwaukee skyline through my office windows. I've been asking myself the same question since the party. I think it goes back to when we were kids. You were always the smart one, the one with the big ideas and the determination to make them happen. You were smart too, Julia. You still are, but in different ways, she acknowledged. You were building circuit boards while I was building social networks. You solved problems. I navigated people. And somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that your kind of intelligence was the kind that mattered more. So I tried to compete on your terms, and when I couldn't, I tried to diminish your achievements instead. Her honesty was disarming. This wasn't the defensive, competitive Julia I was used to. This was someone engaged in genuine self-reflection. I've been thinking about that science fair in 8th grade, she continued. Your water filtration system versus my baking soda volcano. I smiled at the memory. You got more attention. But you got the blue ribbon, she countered. And I was so jealous. Not just of the ribbon, but of how you didn't seem to need the attention. You were satisfied with creating something that worked, something that mattered. I've never had that kind of internal validation. We talked for hours, unraveling years of misunderstandings and competitive patterns. Julia shared how our parents' constant comparisons had shaped her view of herself in relation to me. I admitted that my withdrawal had probably contributed to the distance between us, that I had given up on trying to have a genuine relationship rather than continuing to make the effort. As evening fell, casting long shadows across my office,
Julia asked. Do you think we can start over? Not forget the past, but maybe build something different going forward. I'd like to try, I said sincerely, but it has to be based on who we really are, not who we think the other wants us to be. Julia nodded, a genuine smile spreading across her face. I'd like to get to know my sister, the innovative CEO who's changing lives with accessible technology. And I'd like to know my sister, the strategic thinker who navigates complex corporate environments, I replied with an answering smile. 6 months later, I stood backstage at the Pinnacle Technology Conference preparing to deliver the keynote address on the future of accessible technology. Julia waited with me, no longer working for Pinnacle, but for a smaller firm where, in her words, the culture better aligns with my values. The holiday party incident had prompted her to reevaluate not just our relationship, but her career path as well. After several frank conversations with her boss, she had realized that the competitive, often cutthroat environment at Pinnacle was bringing out her worst qualities. Her new position at a women-led technology consultancy offered fewer status symbols, but greater satisfaction and a healthier work culture. Nervous? She asked, straightening my blazer with a sisterly touch. A little, I admitted. Public speaking isn't my natural habitat. You'll be amazing, she assured me. Just talk about the work the way you talked to me that day in your office. The passion comes through. As I stepped onto the stage to address the audience of industry leaders and developers, I caught sight of Julia giving me a thumbs up from the wings. Our relationship wasn't perfect, and we still had moments of falling into old patterns. But we were making progress, learning to see and appreciate each other for who we really were, rather than through the distorted lens of competition. In the end, that was the most meaningful success of all. The thunderous applause following my keynote speech at the Pinnacle Technology Conference still echoed in my ears as I stepped off the stage. Julia was the first to greet me, wrapping me in a genuine hug. You knocked it out of the park, Abby, she beamed. Did you see Frederick Spencer nodding along when you talked about integrating adaptive technologies from the design phase? You've got him completely convinced. I laughed, feeling light with relief and accomplishment. Let's hope so. The more companies that build accessibility into their development process, the closer we get to truly inclusive technology. We made our way to the reception area where conference attendees were gathering for the networking session. Several people approached to congratulate me on the speech, including Catherine Simmons, who had become a valuable ally within Pinnacle. Abigail, that was exactly the message our development team needed to hear, she said warmly. And Julia, how lovely to see you again. How's the new position treating you? It's challenging in all the right ways, Julia replied with genuine enthusiasm. I'm learning to measure success differently, focusing on impact rather than just advancement. As Catherine moved on to greet other guests, Julia leaned closer to me. 6 months ago, I would have been jealous of you being the center of attention like this. Now I'm just proud. It's a strange feeling, but a good one. Her candor touched me deeply. We had spent the past 6 months rebuilding our relationship, meeting regularly for coffee or dinner, even collaborating on a small project where Julia's firm had consulted on the marketing strategy for Access Tech's newest product line. Each interaction had been a step toward a healthier dynamic, but this moment of genuine pride from Julia felt like a breakthrough. Thank you for being here today, I said sincerely. It means a lot. Where else would I be for my sister's big moment? She replied, squeezing my arm affectionately. As we mingled with the conference attendees, I was struck by how differently Julia interacted with people now compared to the holiday party. Gone was the constant self-promotion and status signaling. Instead, she listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in the conversations, rather than looking for opportunities to elevate herself. Later, as we shared a quiet dinner after the conference events had concluded, I broached a subject that had been on my mind. I've been thinking about Mom and Dad, I began cautiously. We should visit them together soon. It's been a while since we've both been home at the same time. Julia nodded thoughtfully. I'd like that. Maybe we could even tell them about our companies collaborating. Dad always said we'd make a good team if we ever stopped competing long enough to work together. He did, didn't he? I'd forgotten that. There's a lot I think we both chose to forget or ignore over the years, Julia said, her expression turning reflective. Like how Mom always pushed me toward more visible achievements because she thought I needed the external validation, while she encouraged your independent streak because she knew you were more internally motivated. I considered this perspective which Julia had never shared before. You think Mom was trying to support our different personalities rather than playing favorites? I've been seeing a therapist, Julia admitted. Part of my post-holiday party self-improvement plan. She's helped me recognize some patterns in how I interpret past events. I always assumed Mom favored you because you were smarter, but looking back, I think she was just trying to parent us according to our different needs. This reframing of our childhood opened up a new avenue of healing for both of us. Over dessert, we shared memories comparing our different perceptions of the same events, and finding that the truth often lay somewhere in the middle of our experiences. Do you remember that career day in high school? Julia asked. When I said I wanted to be a CEO and you said you wanted to be an engineer, I nodded, smiling at the memory. Dad joked that we should start a company together. And here we are, a CEO and a strategic consultant finally collaborating instead of competing, Julia mused. It only took us 20 years to follow his advice. The evening ended with plans for a joint visit to our parents and a commitment to monthly sister dinners regardless of our busy schedules. As we parted ways outside the restaurant, Julia hugged me tightly. I'm sorry it took something as dramatic as the holiday party fiasco for me to see what I was doing, she said. But I'm grateful for where we are now. Me too, I replied honestly. Sometimes the most painful moments lead to the most important growth. In the months that followed, our relationship continued to strengthen. Julia visited Access Tech regularly, taking a genuine interest in our projects and even offering valuable insights from her business perspective. I attended events at her new company supporting her as she built a reputation based on substance rather than self-promotion. The holiday season arrived again, and with it came another corporate party, this time at Julia's new firm. She had specifically requested that I attend as her guest of honor. No hidden CEOs this time, I promise, she joked when she extended the invitation. Just a chance to celebrate together. The contrast between this event and last year's Pinnacle party couldn't have been more striking. Julia introduced me proudly to her colleagues, accurately describing Access Tech's work and our recent achievements. She seemed comfortable in her own skin, no longer needing to diminish others to feel successful. During the evening, Julia's new boss raised a toast to the team's accomplishments over the past year. When she specifically mentioned Julia's contribution to their recent client acquisition strategy, I felt a surge of genuine pride for my sister. The recognition was well-deserved, based on actual achievements rather than self-promotion. Later, as we stood by the window overlooking the city lights, Julia reflected on her journey. You know, losing that promotion at Pinnacle was the best thing that ever happened to me professionally. It forced me to reevaluate what success really means. And what does it mean to you now? I asked. Doing work that matters, she replied without hesitation. Building relationships based on mutual respect. Finding satisfaction in the process, not just the outcome. She smiled at me. All things you seem to understand intuitively while I was busy chasing external validation. We all find our own path, I said gently. The important thing is that we support each other along the way. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the remarkable transformation in our relationship over the past year. From the humiliation and revelation of the Pinnacle holiday party to the genuine connection we now shared, the journey had been challenging but immeasurably rewarding. Success, I had learned, wasn't just about building a thriving company or securing multi-million-dollar partnerships.
It was about creating space for authentic relationships, supporting others in their growth, and finding freedom from the need for external validation. True success included the ability to celebrate others' achievements without feeling diminished by them. Julia had finally learned that lesson too, finding greater fulfillment in a role that aligned with her values than in the prestigious position she had once so desperately pursued. By stepping away from the constant competition that had defined our relationship for decades, we had both found something more valuable than any professional achievement, a genuine sisterhood based on mutual respect and support. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone lit up with a text from Julia. "Thanks for coming tonight. Love having my sister in my corner." I smiled, typing a reply, "Always. That's what sisters are for." Have you ever experienced a moment of truth like this in your own life? A time when someone who underestimated you was forced to see your true value? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this tale of sisterly redemption resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of triumph over family drama. Remember that sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect isn't a loud comeback, but simply standing in your truth and letting your accomplishments speak for themselves. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep shining your light, no matter who tries to dim it.